Welcome everyone to this webinar. This is one of our regular webinars we do where we discuss a number of issues, and we do this regularly every week. And we're building up as a result of that quite a large database of webinars, which is really good in creating a knowledge sharing environment. And in this webinar, we're going to deal with a topic that we have dealt with before, both in webinars and meetings, and that's radicalisation. We've actually held meetings on that in the House of Commons. We've done seminars on that with the Local Government Information Unit, and we have done webinars on it. We've done webinars on extremism, right-wing extremism, and gang culture and extremism as well. So we've covered quite a lot of areas, but the area we haven't dealt with is how people become radicalized, how it starts, what happens. You know, lots of people think, for example, in the Islamic community, it starts in mosques, and it doesn't. I mean, it very rarely starts in mosques. Mosques actually try to prevent it. Where it often starts, where it usually starts, is on the internet by people being groomed, often when they're very young. And we've got two people with us now, Marisa de Jager, you can see her here, and Nigel Boulton, who have done a lot of work on finding out and discovering why people get radicalized through the internet, and particularly children and young people. And they've also done a lot of work in trying to address that problem as well. And they're going to take us through that now. But before they start, let me say this webinar will be recorded, is being recorded, and hopefully it will be edited and up on YouTube tomorrow so we can disseminate it quite widely. And secondly, as both Marisa and Nigel speak, please type up your comments and your questions. You don't have to wait for them to finish. Type them up straight away, and then we'll take them up as soon as they have finished their presentation. Anyhow, thanks Marisa and Nigel for doing this, and I'm going to hand over to you now to do your presentation. So thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marisa de Jager. I am a social worker by background. I have experience in practice for child protection in particular. And Nigel and myself, and he'll introduce himself in a moment, basically work nationally, and our passion is the safeguarding of children. We are involved with lots of partnerships in the country, and I've written lots of operating principles in relation to radicalisation and the prevent strategy, and mainly safeguarding issues that affect children today. We also run the #VOC, which is Voice of the Child, national and international campaign for children in particular, and that is basically on Twitter and Periscope and other social media forms where we can communicate with children today. So that's me.
Hi everyone, my name's Nigel Boulton. I'm, well, supposedly retired. I'm a retired police officer, served for 31 years, specialised in intelligence, in homicide, and towards the end of my career as a terrorism senior investigating officer. Marisa and I work together. We've created a partnership and businesses over the years, absolutely focusing on children's rights, the voice of the child, and safeguarding of children. And we're going to just spin through a bit of a presentation this evening for you, basically around the role of local authority, parents and the community, but also focusing very much on partnership. Everything Marisa and I do, and we passionately believe, has to be done in partnership. The days of local authority social workers holding the remit for protecting children for whatever reason, in our view, is completely gone. And they cannot do it alone, as good as they are. And it has to be done in partnership.
Okay, so the role of the local authority, parents and community. Now, as a social worker from both this country and my background in South Africa, I've worked plenty of remits, and basically in terms of child protection and also within the community. And community, professionals and parents is the key bit for us that actually brings it back to the child and makes sure that the children are where they need to be in various forms, but we have to listen to children as well.
So, by way of introduction, we've not come here tonight or sitting to talk in this webinar to be some great experts on radicalisation. We're here to talk about our perspective of social work, policing, partners, and how the modern way of trying to identify when children are being radicalised maybe needs to change, evolve, and some of the things that we believe which may be useful to other professionals who hold the remit for this at the moment. So I think we all know that the threat of terrorism to the UK is not new. It's not an Islamic only history. It goes back many years. Even in my service, I can remember back to doing sensitive and non-sensitive investigations and operations against other types of terrorism, which occupied huge amounts of policing time. So it's not a new phenomenon. And I think we need to remember that this isn't a new issue. It's a different issue, but it's certainly not new.
And definitely it's now a safeguarding issue.
It is, and I think that's the big thing we want to get across tonight, that it is a safeguarding issue for children, and it shouldn't be separated, we'll go into this a bit more, from the normal mainstream safeguarding of children and young people. Just as a side issue, Marisa and I always talk about children and young people from the age of 0 or pre-birth right up to 25 because of the statutory connection over the age of 18 for children that have been looked after children and the law in relation to local authorities as a corporate parent. So we always think 0 to 25 when it comes to children and young people.
So the current political and cultural disagreements concerning Prevent in particular is quite interesting. I mean, there's been so many different discussions, not just over the media, but I know within local authorities in particular, and social work teams and education, and how we as partnerships deal with it.
Yeah.
And of course, we always look to the police and you know, seek advice, I suppose, in terms of Prevent issues. And for us, they are the experts in particular. I'm not saying, you know, they're the only experts out there, but in terms of police and how they deal with radicalisation, we always look towards them because this is something that you deal with, isn't it?
Which is an interesting point, because certainly our experience is families, communities look more to the local authority, maybe not so much communities, but certainly families do, than they do to policing. The other side to the current political and cultural debate is there's an awful lot of people, and we haven't come here to say whether Prevent is a good strategy or not. It is what we have and what we have to work to. But I think it's widely accepted now that there's a real debate about whether the Prevent strategy fits well with all parts of society and all communities and cultural diversity. But maybe that's one for another day. But one of the things, Marisa, and I certainly want to emphasise tonight is we are where we are and we have the current debates because they are there, but it doesn't stop us working together as partners in terms of trying to identify the earliest opportunity, the need, the harm, and the risks around children being radicalised. Very interesting, on that first stream, we tried to find some updated figures. Some of you in the webinar may actually be able to put us right here. We tried quite hard to find some more up-to-date figures around children and young people in England and Wales identified as risk of being radicalised. And as you can see from the screen, hopefully there, it was 834 in 2015. And we certainly saw some figures today on the internet around over 50 children now having been prevented from going off to Syria with whoever really, but mainly families. So if anyone has more up-to-date figures, we'd certainly be quite happy to be put right. But that's quite a frightening statistic, I think, that nearly 1,000 children, young people, are at risk of being radicalised.
So, as Francis said before in his introduction, religion alone is not a risk factor. Absolutely, we've worked with faith groups, we've worked with lots of communities where everyone is trying to combat extremism or radicalisation. I go back to the point again that radicalisation is one of many safeguarding issues, and I don't think as professionals personally, in my opinion, we can, you know, polarize, like I call it, radicalisation. We have to look at the assessment from a social work perspective. Again, it's the assessment of the parent, it's the assessment of the child relationship. It's actually what that child means within a community and what that child's voice is within a school community, for example. Amongst friends who may have issues, you know, of radicalisation, and actually how that child is drawn in. And unless we assess need, harm and risk factors completely from a social work and a partnership perspective, I think we are focusing on the wrong thing. We have to focus on safeguarding.
We do, and we have to focus on the intelligence piece that we pin together, we piece together to understand what the issues are that are putting children and young people at risk. We worked recently in a local authority somewhere in England where it was very much the social, the poverty issues that were driving young people to think some very difficult things and look at some very difficult and dangerous things on the internet, and they weren't religion based at all. So I think we need to keep our minds wide open to understanding the intelligence piece that will give us that trigger to start to understanding the risks. I think one of the most important things that we've looked over the years, and it's very difficult to interpret in some communities, is that it's not just the professional responsibility. A lot has been talked about people in the community so-called giving up their young people to the professions, but actually the professions themselves will never tackle this problem. I don't know many people who don't disagree with that, but it's absolutely true to us and the work that we've been involved in that it's no good just labelling it as a professional responsibility.
No,
it's just not.
But I also think that parents and the community in particular need support. And where that support is coming from are from the people that's actually dealing with it at the moment. And I think parents in particular need support in terms of how to understand where their children or young people are going through. But in particular, it's that resilience building within the community and almost that stronger families or strongest community type of aspect that needs to happen in order to address this.
I think one of the challenges we've seen in relation to social work assessments is how much investment we're actually putting into our social work staff and our management and management oversight and supervision of social work in terms of what's their knowledge of this very difficult issue. And a lot of places where we've worked with some brilliant social workers, that knowledge has actually not really been invested in. And I think there's a real challenge for us in the public sector and in the private sector as well, to actually equip our people at the very front end of assessing children and parents when it comes to radicalisation. And maybe that's something we need to look for in the future.
I also think, as we move on to the next slide, it's really, really important from a multi-agency safeguarding point of view that we have those joint partnership agreements. Now, I know there's lots of meetings taking place. We've seen really, really good practice across the country in terms of how they're actually combining child sexual exploitation, prevent, gang-related activity, etc. But I think in terms of preventing in particular, and the guidance are there for a reason, I think we need to think and outside of the box the whole time and actually know what the children are telling us. Because usual safeguarding practice, no matter what it is, will apply to that child and the family when it comes into a social work department. So for me, that's a critical aspect. And actually how we intervene earlier as well in terms of early help type of aspects.
I think one of the key things that we've seen and we've tried to support uplift across the country is the front door of most social work, social care departments in the country now have some type of multi-agency response, whether it's a MASH or some type of front door where partners are involved. But the classic problem that we see is that prevent referral pathways are still in an awful lot of places kept separate for lots of reasons and some very sound arguments around sensitivity and mental health or whatever. But actually, if you cut away at it, the only way of doing it effectively is to make some type of sensitive pathway that is totally joined with your normal referral and contact processes, linked to your levels of need documents in local authorities, and not separate them, but actually work it as a safeguarding contact, safeguarding referral, or contact around additional need, harm and risk to children. And we see so many now that are still kept separate, and it does nothing at all in intelligence and information terms to add to that picture to understand the child's needs.
Yeah, and I think if you use the levels of need document that Nigel is referring to as a partnership document, then you speak the same language. And that might sound bizarre to many, but actually if we can have a guidance document that actually allows us to speak that same language, then the identification of children at risk or in need, or the future harm predicament actually comes into play, because we are able to much better say collectively as a partnership where we think at that point in time where that child actually needs a service from. And in terms of prevention or intervention or diversion type of opportunities, that will be much clearer at the front door.
Yeah, it will. The last two bullets on the screen, hopefully you can all see, we've touched on. We really believe that we need to invest in our frontline staff. That's not just about social work, it's about any frontline staff. And if we've done a lot of work with colleagues in and around gangs and county lines and trafficking of young people. And there are real links, as Francis said at the beginning, around the radicalisation and escalation of violence of young people and children. I think one of the big challenges we've got in these times is to actually invest in our staff and give them the knowledge and expertise
and the tools,
because generally, really good frontline staff haven't had that much input in terms of identifying the really underlying early issues of this. So I think that is a challenge when it comes to our great staff, isn't it?
Absolutely. So where's the child's voice? That is critical. What children and young people are telling us today, if we don't speak their language, I fall back on that. And I'm not necessarily talking about the levels of need document for children and young people at this point in time, although they will understand it. It's more about they are playing games. That's the method of talking in terms of gamification. There are many types of social media sites that children and young people are on. And I think it's really important that as professionals that we actually get to know those sites, actually incorporate that as part of our assessment work, because otherwise we are losing our children along the way. What they are saying very clearly to us is, I am not filling out another form. Why don't you try social media or try to communicate with me in a manner that I understand? And I think that's critical.
It is, and it's a real challenge. We know that, we accept that, but actually that challenge we think has got to be taken on. I think it's worth just pointing out, Marisa and I always do this because we believe in this, is to go back to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the particular documents there on the screen, 1989. And after it, we've put the 3 Ps. Now, for those of you who may not recognise them immediately, the 3 Ps are basically the UK ratified this piece of, I won't call it legislation, but this piece, this rights bill and the convention. And when it ratified it some years ago, it actually said that its delivery model was going to be around 3 words that basically start with a P. And we think these are just perfect every time you come back to them. When you talk about children, is are we involving children enough in the design and delivery of services and the bigger conversation? And those 3 Ps being
protection, participation, and also the provision. And I think, again, when you look at radicalisation within your local areas and where you are, always fall back on the 3 Ps. It's there. It talks about children. It talks about their rights, and it actually tells us where that child's voice will be in relation to that.
So we always test the things that we do with our clients in local authorities and health and policing. Is, do we have enough participation from children and young people to be able to protect them and actually deliver the services that they need, so the provision. And actually, it's not a bad equation to use for those of you who maybe not used it over the years. We like it. The create a safe space in a modern way is really interesting. We have a view that children will just look at us if you don't approach them and create that safe space. A lot of children in this world that we're talking about tonight are either excluded from normal society for a variety of reasons. I mean, we could throw them out there, like homeschooling, those that aren't allowed into school anymore, etc. But actually, we've got to find ways, whether it's through performing arts, creative arts, through social media, of creating a safe space to allow them to be included, so that the inclusivity word rears its head. And that's got to be modern, because what they tell us right the way across the world when they talk to us through different social media is they won't bother. If we're not talking to them in their manner, why would they bother to even trust us to start that conversation? So modern way, yet another challenge, but we think it's got to be taken on. So
Yeah.
to conclude, because we've only got so many minutes, and I'm sure people want to ask us the odd question. We are both totally committed to the fact that extremism, in whatever form, radicalisation in whatever form, has to sit within the safeguarding agenda for your local area, for our local area, for any areas.
I think also an interesting thing, if you think about parents, because this is also about parents in the local authority and the community, it's how we actually join the parent, which is an interesting concept sometimes for professionals, as well as the community up as stakeholders in really, really important meetings in order to actually get in with the safeguarding agenda and help with the preventative aspect. Because they have a responsibility within their communities, all of us have, and society looks upon, especially the police, in order for protection, but society also looks to professionals in terms of how are we dealing with certain things. And I think if we can use parents in a different way and a more creative way to actually help us to combat, I suppose, certain aspects within our communities, then that surely must be the way forward. And then to bring it back to children, who's better to tell us where children and young people are today? They are living it, and it's their future. So I think it's really important that we make sure that if it is through social media or the internet, or whatever they are getting up to these days, that we actually are there and actually we are supporting them in that.
So there's a very quick snapshot through there, just some of the things we believe in, the things we're trying to achieve with some colleagues across the UK and Europe and elsewhere. Hopefully it's useful. There are some key issues around children that we're trying to work on. But yeah, that's our little presentation, Francis.
Okay, well, thank you very much for doing that presentation. That was really useful and gave a good basis for a discussion, which I'm sure we can have now. Well, let's start with what we have at the moment. Jane is saying, you're talking about investing in frontline staff. I mean, to what extent have current government cuts affected that, and how has that impacted on the work one does to, prevent radicalisation?
Well, it's a good question, and I imagine everybody that sees this webinar or joins it will know the answer, that any kind of cuts of public sector always fall in the same kind of places. They fall around people because they make up the massive proportion of budgets, and when you can't cut any more people, you kind of cut the things that are attached to people. And I know that from my senior leadership role over many years. It has an effect. Why would we hide it? It has, but I suppose the challenge we bring to the discussion is if we want to do this properly, then we need to equip our people. So the answer to the good question is yes, it has, and I've seen it since I left service 7 years ago. Do we need to find different ways of doing that? Yes, we do.
Absolutely. I also want to just be there. I mean, from a local authority perspective, we've seen more and more cuts being made, and it's really, really difficult at times now to deliver the services to children and young people the way we want to deliver it. And I think what we've seen as well is workers are becoming more and more creative in their dealings with families, and I think partnerships are shrinking together. So there's more eggs in one basket than they've ever been before, and I think that probably is a good way forward. It's not the best way, but it's a good way in a very difficult situation. The other bit is also, and I come back to, we have to involve the community. There are really key members of the community that actually can make a difference in a totally different way. Through apprenticeship schemes, through whatever means, where we can support children and families in a different way. Because what children are saying to us as well is, we are really getting bored. And with all the cuts and the services falling away, there must be other ways that we can actually engage them and participate in a different way.
I think, just to add to the other pieces, and I'm not getting political, I'm apolitical, non-political for all my service, but we've got to change the rhetoric from throwing money at hard, investigative, intelligence-driven, reactive work to a more balanced of actually, it's like in safeguarding, if we can do more to early identify, we will do less of the hard stuff at the other end. And that discussion is definitely not being had.
Okay, let's come back to that in a minute. How do you get your intelligence? Because I know, Nigel, you've given a lot of thought to that. Michelle's talking about safe spaces. You've talked about safe spaces and places where people can go, young people can go and feel safe. Now, she's mentioned, have you used community gardens as a safe space? And maybe you can answer that. But also, could you tell us about, what safe spaces are ones that children and young people find acceptable to them? I mean, what an adult might think is a safe space might not be what a child thinks is a safe space.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The safe space concept, I mean, the gardens one's interesting. If they're interested in going in the garden and it's a safe space, then use it. We haven't. Our safe space is the work we've done over the last 2 years have been with the theatre company Chicken Shed, which an awful lot of people will know. If you don't, they are an inclusive charity theatre in North London with tentacles across the world. And their whole point is to create child inclusivity and child involvement through the performing arts. And we work with them, and they create with us a space where children engage with the performing creative arts and they feel safe to talk. Actually, we've got evidence of children seeking services to get out of gangs and serious youth violence for that very reason.
Okay, I'd recommend Chicken Shed because it's in the area where I live. In fact, I know the two founders of that, so it's an incredibly good organization. When we look at the partnerships you're talking about, we're talking about a whole series of people involved in organizations. We're talking about the social media companies, the parents, the children themselves, the schools and the community. Let's look at each of those. I mean, do you think the companies like Facebook and so on do enough, or do they have a better and a more proactive role to play on this?
I think as times went by and as the technology developed, Facebook, for example, have now put certain things in place. And what children and young people are telling us is that actually things like Twitter and Facebook, yes, some might use it, but actually that's not where they spend their time on today. Things like Blab, that's no longer in existence. Yeah, that's gone. That was the in thing after Facebook came in. But Snapchat and all the other social media things are more of an interest, I think. Yeah. And things like gamification in particular, that is where most young men, I would say, and maybe girls as well, but I know I speak a lot of young men, and actually they say that is their world. They can communicate worldwide, nationally, or just with the neighbour next door, but that is where they need to be. I think we've got to accept that at my old age, I haven't got a hope of understanding how young people of Generation Z are going to communicate. And that was brought home to me greatly, actually, by someone I know very well who's in their very early 20s, who actually watches football on sites that I couldn't even find through normal Google or Bing or wherever, because they're not on mainstream internet. They know exactly how to use the dark side of the internet. And we just have to start to accept that they are way, way ahead of us and listen to them, because they will tell us how to do it, and they do tell us how they do it. And I think young people, and certainly there are people out there, adults, that find ways around, Facebook or social media or wherever, and they always seems to be ahead of the game. And some of the social media sites really have very good safeguarding guidance in place, but there are some that really need to step their game up and actually help us to protect children safer. At the end of the day, if parents allow their children to be on social media and all these other things are board like games and stuff, then I think the parents need to take responsibility for that as well. It's a difficult one, Francis.
Yeah, but are you saying in a way, I mean, because it is difficult, really is difficult. You've got WhatsApp as well, which is encrypted, and so getting into it is difficult. So are you saying in a way, I suppose, that although you can ask companies to do better, people who want to use the social media for, bad means will always find a way. And so we've got to have a different strategy. We've got to have a strategy of confronting that, accepting it's going to happen, and then take it on head on.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I'd also put a challenge out there to every professional. When was the last time you actually held young people's session to try and identify how best to do what it is we're talking about. Because the majority of us always seem to sit around in circles and think about how the best way to protect our children. Actually, some of our experiences is they can give us the answers without us actually lifting too much of a finger. So yeah, that is when we really start to do the 3 Ps, and we've seen some real benefits in that. I'll chuck it out there.
Yeah, I was gonna say to you, and you partly answered it, but not entirely. I was going to say, if I was a parent and I said, I've got a young child, but I'm older than you, Nigel, so it's not a young child. But if I did have a young child, and I would say to you, I'm a parent, what can I do? I mean, what would you answer to them? I mean, you partly said, they can't do everything because can't understand where the child's at. But how can they begin to get that understanding, and what can they do?
There is some very good advice on the internet. I'm not knocking it. And CEOP and other agencies have published some extremely good, simple, without being derogatory, advice for parents and guardians and older siblings to help protect those that are getting involved in social media. And let's not forget, children are getting involved at very, very early ages. That's the frightening bit for me. They know how to use an iPad at about the age of 3 and 4 now. Never mind, they know what they're using it for. There is advice out there to answer your question, but I think parents and teachers actually, you have to do your best with what's available to you, but listen to children. What we found is children will tell you what they're using, and you won't know it, but they will tell you if you ask them in the right way.
Okay, and I mean, you mentioned teachers as well. So schools clearly have a role in this. I mean, what can schools do? And there are schools who are doing a lot. There are schools that are very innovative. We had someone from Waltham Forest, and the work they were doing was fantastic. But you must have examples as well of schools that are doing some really good things that would be case studies of good practice for others.
Mm-hmm. There's many. I mean, there's so many different initiatives out there. I think the key bit for me with teachers, because for me, they see children every single day, or young people, they spend quality time with them. Actually, they're in the best position to build a relationship of trust with children and young people. And there are many, many teachers that have really, really good relationships, and they can pick up on children's behavior, because voice of the child is not just what the child is telling you. It's about using all your senses in making sure that you understand that child and in terms of the behaviour or whatever's going on. So they are good practices.
There is one example that springs to mind as you drop it on us, Francis, is a school somewhere in the West Midlands has actually designed their own school website to be interactive and built by the young people. It's a primary school, so quite young children. And actually they have been involved with the different types of social media, and there are parts of their website now where they build social media within it and within a safe environment, so it's not going out across the internet. But they've also been involved with the building of the website and the collecting of the information that builds that website, which when we saw it, hugely impressive, and children are learning about social media. They're learning about safe ways of writing social media, but they're also learning about how that is then projected through a portal, through a website. And I think the school was really innovative to do that.
Yeah, and parents engage, and what it then becomes is through that portal, is they create a community. So in terms of radicalisation or other safeguarding issues of child sexual exploitation, whatever, there are specific topics where you can invite people in to talk about certain things, and then the other bit is also where children then learn how to safely communicate. So that's key.
Okay, Michelle's asked a question about the de-radicalisation process, but let me ask one before that about the radicalisation process. I mean, do you notice amongst children that they're radicalised in different ways depending on their age, what culture they come from? For example, there's right-wing extremism taking place and there's Islamic, and they may get radicalised in different ways. The internet's different for them. Have you noticed differences in the process of radicalisation?
Yeah.
It's huge. It's huge. It's context driven, it's social driven, it's family driven, which is why it's the intelligence base, it's the context around that child and the intelligence base that will lead you to identify it. By trying to polarize a view, around, oh, well, that child lives in that community, therefore they're going to react in this way. It's just not helpful. It's got to be built from the ground up around the intelligence base, how that child's reacting, the assessment, etc., etc. There are so many different ways that we've either seen or heard that it's almost like an individual thing that fits the context in that child's operating.
And I think it makes it difficult, and I'm not... some children or young people that's been excluded from schools and then go into people referral units or that are homeschooled as a result, or whatever the case might be. We can track them through the system and we can almost see the varieties of stuff that actually is happening to them. But when they're homeschooled or they actually are completely lost from the radar, it becomes really, really difficult. And those are the children and young people that we honestly need to worry about, because they are hidden and their voices are hidden, and we have no idea what they're getting up to, and then they pop up at some point. And I think we also don't need to lose sight of the real risks around gangs, gang culture, and serious youth violence, and how they link. And it's not widely discussed, but actually the escalation of violence and dangerousness, if we can call it that, and actually young people, children, going into prisons, and the reasons why they become very quickly at risk of radicalisation in prison really needs to be more understood. So yeah, it's very much, I think, to answer your question around the individual context.
So does that mean the other element, the other partner that's vital in this is the community? And I mean, how do you link with the community to get them to play a role? And how do you link with the community to get the sort of intelligence that you need to try and address the problem of radicalisation?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. That's where, if we think about it, that's where Prevent came from, or what Prevent tried to achieve, which was that ground-up understanding of the information and the intelligence to do it. As it worked, not for me to say, it has in many cases. I think, again, many varied community-driven issues, but every partnership that exists across the UK really has a strong, to my knowledge, has a strong community connection. It's what you use it for. So the crime and disorder partnerships that came in many years ago and other partnerships are all good bases for wider community involvement.
And I think, as is, we currently still have local children safeguarding boards. Many of those safeguarding boards have faith group leaders, for example, on it, education leads, etc., etc. And I think it's important from a local authority perspective, and I know we are linking with certain people within the community, that actually those branches go out and that you actually involve the community that way. So it's about being creative again, I think, Francis, in terms of utilising faith groups, going to mosque meetings, making sure that everyone is actually aware, going to schools, and then forming a community within that local area.
Okay, Michelle takes it one step further and asks about the process of de-radicalisation. She says, I mean, how long does that process take? Is it different for people of different ages? And do you have to deal with different conditions? She mentions that lots of people, or many people, get radicalised through gaming, for example, and they get addicted. So you have to deal with a problem of addiction as well. So, I mean, what's the process of radicalisation and how different is it for different communities?
To be honest, I think it's almost like how long is a piece of string. It is so individual focused in terms of the addiction, because at the end of the day, it does come back to the addiction. It is a process of recovery. It's a process of trust again. It's a process of actually going back into the community and actually demonstrating that you're not, going to do certain things. That's a difficult one, Michelle, to be honest. And I don't think we have an answer completely in relation to that, but I think on an individual basis, on a case-by-case basis, that's how people address it, and it can sometimes take years. Yeah.
Well, and it may. How do we ever know it's happened?
Yes.
One of the big challenges, I think, is that, and I certainly wouldn't want to advise on that side of it, is what do we do with the children that now come back from Syria, from war zones? How are we going to bring these children back into mainstream society? Do I know the answer? No, I don't. And it's going to be really testing and really interesting, because people are going to have to do that. Children are going to come back into this country from Syria.
And I think it's age specific as well, because if you look at trauma, and the impact of trauma and child development, where that child is at that point of time, the maturity of the child or the young person that's being radicalized. I think there's such a huge combination of things that we need to look at. So yeah, it's a difficult one.
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously when you have people radicalized and you want to get into the process of de-radicalization, you have to decide when the best intervention points are. So, I mean, do you have advice you can give to local authorities, parents, schools, or whoever about when to intervene, how to intervene, and the best way to do it?
I think as early as possible, it will be my answer, because I think in terms of as soon as there's a concern, consult. Whether or not it is just a little niggle that you have in terms of certain things, I think it's pick up the phone and make sure that you at least discuss it with someone. It might be nothing, but actually it might be something. And I think as soon as a partnership, like in terms of a multi-agency safeguarding hub, can have a proactive rather than a reactive approach, I think that's the best way in.
And you mentioned something quite interesting in your presentation, that, you know, lots of children, and we've done a webinar on this 2 weeks ago, are being excluded from school. And many of those are being excluded or because of behavioural problems, learning difficulties and so on. And schools just don't want to know about them because with their budgets, they can't cope, so they just get rid of them. And okay, some go to homeschooling that are good, some don't have any schooling at all. And these are ripe for radicalization. There's some number, and we did one 2 weeks ago, really good initiatives, innovative schemes to help excluded children. But have you given any thought to how you tackle this problem of exclusion and radicalization?
Well, probably thereby hangs the problem is children being excluded from school. We are putting them into the ungoverned space. So actually ungoverned space will breed not just radicalisation, it will breed criminality, it will breed marginalisation, a whole range of issues. For me, it's you've got to go right back to the core policy issue of, do we want our children in this country outside of the school gate, or do we want them inside it? I argue they should be inside it. And there's so little control over homeschooling, and actually homeschooling is virtually not on the radar. Local authorities don't really have the powers anymore to see it for what it is. I think it's a fundamental policy issue about our children being pushed out of that school gate. Now, if it's about budgets or performance or whatever, well, then I'll have the debate. But actually, when you isolate a child from that at 7-8 hours a day, we are storing up problems for ourselves in the future.
And I think the children and young people's sense of belonging obviously will go to groups that actually takes them in because they're vulnerable. So whether or not it's gangs, whether or not it's radicalisation, whether or not it's grooming type of activity or county lines, if you exclude a child that for various reasons that can't go back to mainstream education, they will go and seek another sense of belonging, and that is very dangerous. And
we know they do. We know they do, in some horrible ways.
And what about, you mentioned trafficking. I mean, to what extent is trafficking and radicalisation linked together in any way?
I think there's a very, very close link to trafficking and radicalisation. I think, well, to all of them. And I think I go back to my point in terms of we shouldn't polarise just certain safeguarding issues. In the UK, what we've seen nationally is that people have, for various reasons, responded either by having a trafficking team or a prevent team or CSE team, but it's the crossover and the connections that actually picks up, that actually is such a close link between all of them, isn't there? Which is visible through auditing.
And it actually goes against the core strengths of building intelligence pictures by concentrating on polarised issues. If you take trafficking of children and county lines and gangs, if you try to hone in on understanding one of those issues, you will miss the entire picture of the risk, need, harm and risk to that child. Because if you look at the intelligent picture and build it as an intelligence picture without polarisation, you'll understand the need, harm and risk to that child. Actually, county lines and trafficking children and the connections with gangs, gang activity, serious violence, and then the onward spiral up through dangerousness to potential risk of radicalisation. Yeah, it is.
But it's difficult. You're sort of playing catch up with young people on the way, aren't you? Because Sheldon Thomas, who does a lot of work with gangs, said, gang membership is getting younger and younger. And once you've learnt the language of that gang, and you said earlier in your presentation, language is important. Once you've learnt it, it's changed. The language has changed, and they're using something different again. So how do the agencies keep up with that? How do they understand that? How do they get into that? Because it's such a mobile sort of problem that we're facing.
I think some partners are really up to speed. There are some that are really behind, if I'm honest. If we've spoken to a bunch of social workers the other day in the West Midlands, and things like Black, which I know is no longer, or Snapchat and those type of social media sites, they weren't interested. I didn't even hear about it or know about it. And now that they know about it, then obviously that's a way in to talk to their children and young people. But some partners, like the police, for example, I think are a bit more up to speed in relation to what's happening. That's my opinion, but I don't know.
let's say some of them might be, but it is a difficult one. And the only way to do it is stay in touch with your intelligent source, and your intelligent source is your children and your young people, and ignore them at your peril.
Yeah, it's about engaging with them in terms of finding out what they are using, and then actually understanding from their perspective how they use it, so that you can then have a meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
Are you happy that frontline workers are up to the job? You talked a bit about it in your presentation, but do you think they have enough knowledge and they're well enough briefed? Because they have a difficult job to do. A social worker does a huge amount of work in a lot of areas, and now you ask them to learn about radicalisation. Sometimes we're overloading them, and we've got to have some sympathy with them. But A, are they up to the job? And B, are they overloaded? And how do you tackle that? How do you create the partnerships that can help them?
I think there's the acceptance that there really needs to be further training in terms of specialisms and how they keep on top of things, and actually as things become a bit more dominant, I suppose, in terms of what's happening in the safeguarding world, people tend to focus on that, like CSE or prevent. But the acceptance is there that more knowledge is needed, that more expertise needs to come in, and it's how we actually link from a frontline service to those experts. The other bit for me is also in terms of the passion is really there to make a difference for children and young people, and that's so visible. Overloading, I think the demand at the front door, in particular from social care, because I can talk about that in particular, is huge, and all the referrals that's coming in from various sources. I think we need to.
From my perspective, it may not resonate well with a lot of professions, but we've got to move away. We talk a lot about moving away from social care intervention. We talk a lot about it, but actually we are still using social care intervention far too much. We need to do far, far more as partnerships.
And the community.
Yeah, and the community within the early offer of help, or whatever it's called in different people's areas. Because it still seems to be the fact that some professionals will pick an issue and the only intervention appears to be, well, that's a social care intervention. It's not going to be achievable. Social work at the front door doing social care interventions are stretched. And actually, it's not appropriate sometimes for social work to lead. It's far more appropriate for education or others to lead in these things. And I think we need to do far more of it. That's not a criticism, it's just the way we are in the UK at the moment.
An example of that is, a parent might be worried about their child being radicalised, but they're afraid to go to the police, they're afraid to go to the social worker, because they're afraid the child will be taken into care. And so they're going to let that child be radicalised rather than lose them from the family. How do you tackle that?
Well, I think for me, it brings it back to where we say, I think it's about who's best placed and who has the best relationship with that parent, and trusting relationship. And that can be any professional within the community, and that professional can then link with the relevant people, like the police or social work, etc. It is a matter of trust and confidence in that professional. And if a parent is too scared to come forward and say help, or actually do not remove my child from it because of, I think we need to find ways in and actually empower and enable that parent in a different way, and that is different professionals.
We've worked to a phrase over many years now, have we not, that safeguarding is everybody's business. And I learned years ago that is so true. Your little piece there, Francis, if you think about people in homes where they've got problems and needs and whatever, actually the police, they're not going to let the police come through the door when they want to go through the door. So they view that as, oh, well, they'll put the door in anyway. They don't want social workers in the house unless they've cleared up, because they want to give a good impression sometimes. But actually, there is a service that they're always quite happy to invite in. And I learned this many, many years ago, and that's the fire service. Quite happy for the fire service to come in when they're doing smoke alarm tests or whatever. And it was so stark to me. Actually, in terms of safeguard and understanding children and families, it is everybody's business. And you're right, we all think it's a well overused phrase. Well, it might be, but it's still very, very relevant.
You mentioned trust as being important, and at the front line level, where you've got people working, at the coalface, that trust is important, and it often exists, and they do work together. But do you find very often, when it comes to these partnerships, the resistance is not at the front line level where they want to work together, but it's a bit further up at middle management level where they're a bit suspicious, they want to protect their position and so on? And do we have to do some work there to sort of get them to ease up a bit?
I have a view that it's not the people. We have a view it's the system. Yeah. It's not the people at all. There's some very, very good middle and senior managers who are desperate to do more, but actually the whole financial structures of the public sector in this country and the pressures and the performance pressures around different departments in government and the different agencies all having different responsibilities and pressures is the thing that holds partnership back. It is not, in our view, the people. We ran a large seminar last year where we asked the question, children in a fractured system, ? And the overriding answer back from children and professionals across the UK to that was, yes, it is. The system is fractured, and the system's fractured, and it's stopping great people working closer together. I honestly don't. I mean, there's good and bad in every profession. We all know that. But I honestly don't believe that there's any level of the public sector that goes to work to be difficult. They are driven by systemic pressure to do different things. I've believed it for a very long time. I've seen it over and over again.
But you started this, Nigel, by saying, yeah, but we are where we are. And in a way, we've got to work from where we are. We may say that the system's fractured and we may all want to change it, but the advice we've got to give surely is we've got to work in this fractured system until it's mended, and we've got to find ways of doing it.
Yeah, we have, but it was interesting to engage with professionals from right across the UK in that debate. Unless we have a conversation about it, and it may be a political one, it may not, then we won't move on. We are where we are until we're not. Bit glib, maybe, but some of us believe in having the conversation to deliver the kind of early shoots of change, and we are starting to see it. Certainly in terms of the way health professionals and health structures are being interwoven into social care structures. Now, it's quite a painful process in some places. It's a brilliant process in others. But unless we keep the conversation going, we're not going to beat this. It was interesting. Marisa and I were in Canada a couple of years ago working. And we met a guy there who had completely broken the mould by putting advocacy services together for children and said, I'm not having these structures anymore. We're going to have one advocacy service where everyone works in one service, one budget, one structure. And the success rates in that part of Canada are incredible. Now, that was because he could afford to do it. And he was a superstar in his own right. We'd been through the system. But just from little conversations, I think we can really start to gain some political will to change some of this stuff that's holding great people back.
So to do that, it's not just resources, it's actually giving people at the coalface the authority to make the sort of experiments that you just talked about in Canada.
Yeah, it is. And it's about people being bold, and this is really interesting. We've had a conversation with one very senior person in an authority recently who just wants people to be bold with ideas. Think the unthinkable, and if it's doable and it's safe and it's a different way of working, then let's do it. Because at the end of the day, why do we all go to work? Now, there's lots of answers to that, but actually most public sector people involved with children go to work to try and make it better for the children that they are working with or they're responsible for. Yeah. If you're really cut to the core, because that's why we do it.
I do also think, in terms of coming back to the community, I'm an absolute advocate for communities getting involved and actually being stakeholders in a safeguarding role. And in particular, I use the example in terms of young people saying what the difficulties were in a particular forum. They are bored, and a mechanic stood up and he said, "Well, I have 5 apprenticeships that I can, give you. So whoever is interested, I can actually help you to become a mechanic." Now that is quite an interesting concept in itself, but it is offering something from the community back to those children and young people who is saying we're involved with all sorts of things we shouldn't be involved with because we are bored. And I'm not saying the community will respond, of course, in that type of way, but I think we need to look to the strengths of people in the community around us in local areas to actually help us move forward. That's the only way for the safeguarding role that is on.
Okay, well, we're sort of coming to the end of this now, but let me just ask you one final point. I mean, you've stressed right the way through your presentation, and you might want to emphasize this again. What is essential in this is listening to the child, the young person's voice. The importance of that can't be underestimated, can it?
No, it can't. And you've said it all there. And we need to listen in the way they're prepared to talk, because I remember years ago I learned around communication. It's a two-way game. It's not just speaking. It's about listening and being able to listen in the right manner. And there are some very, very good examples across the UK and all the public sector of people trying and succeeding to listen to children. And we need to build on it, and we need to put them at the heart of those 3 Ps. Their participation will deliver, i.e. the services that they need, not necessarily the services we think they need, and we'll protect them better. So those 3 Ps have become rather a focal point for Marisa and I.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for doing that. I mean, I think that's been both a very great presentation, gone through a lot of issues, and a good discussion as well, with some good questions coming in. So, I think we've learned a lot, and I think we'll do more on this in the future. So thank you for doing this, Marisa and Nigel, and thank you for everyone for joining us tonight.